Welcome to WikiPodcast.
Hello.
We're continuing our exploration of the Enlightenment and rationalism today.
And we've got a big one. John Locke.
Yes, a really deep dive into his foundational ideas. He's often called the father of liberalism.
He really is. And I think for you listening, if you want to quickly but, thoroughly understand a key architect of modern thought, well, Locke is absolutely essential.
Definitely. His ideas were revolutionary at the time.
And still incredibly influential today. How we gain knowledge, how society should ideally be structured. It connects back to Locke.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, we're drawing mainly from, well, a comprehensive overview of his life and work. The goal is to really unpack his core theories.
Empiricism is one.
Right, his view on how we actually come to know things. And the other big one is the social contract.
He has ideas on society, government, how it should all function.
Our mission, basically, is to show the lasting impact these concepts have had, and still have, really.
Okay, so let's maybe kick things off by setting the stage. Who was John Locke?
Good starting point.
He was born in England, 1632. And importantly, this was a time of massive political upheaval.
You mean the English Civil War and all that?
Precisely. That whole context of societal change, questioning authority, it's really crucial background for understanding his later thinking on power and government.
Absolutely. And he wasn't just an academic scribbling away, was he? He had a pretty varied career.
That's right. He trained as a physician, interestingly enough.
And he was involved in politics and administration, too. Worked with Lord Ashley, served on the Board of Trade and Plantations.
Yeah, that real-world experience, that mix of the practical and the intellectual, I think it definitely shaped his philosophy. It wasn't purely abstract.
Which maybe explains why he became such a pivotal figure.
Hugely pivotal. I mean, we said father of liberalism, and he's consistently ranked as one of the most influential Enlightenment thinkers, full stop.
And his impact wasn't just in politics, right? It was also in epistemology.
Exactly. The theory of knowledge. How do we know what we know? Locke fundamentally shifted how people thought about that. So, yeah, political philosophy and epistemology. A double threat, you might say.
And you can trace his influence forward, can't you, to so many major figures.
Oh, absolutely. You've got Voltaire, Rousseau, those Scottish Enlightenment thinkers.
And the American revolutionaries, too, right? I always hear the Declaration of Independence mentioned in relation to Locke.
Definitely. The phrasing, the core ideas about natural rights, government by consent, it echoes Locke very strongly. His ideas on limited government, protecting fundamental rights, they had this massive, enduring global impact.
Okay, so let's maybe unpack one of those huge contributions first. Empiricism.
Right. Locke is seen as one of the first major British empiricists, kind of following in the footsteps of Francis Bacon.
And the central idea here is the tabula rasa? Am I saying that right?
Tabula rasa, yeah, is Latin for blank slate.
Okay, so what does that mean in terms of knowledge?
Well, it's a pretty radical idea, especially for the time. Before Locke, you had strong traditions, like Cartesian philosophy, believing in innate ideas, the notion that we're born with certain concepts or knowledge already imprinted in our minds.
Like knowing basic logic or maybe the idea of God.
Things like that. Locke basically said, hold on. He argued that at birth, the mind isn't preloaded with anything. It's, well, that's blank. A blank slate.
So if we're not born with knowledge, where does it come from? How do we get ideas?
According to Locke, it comes only from experience. That's the key.
Experience meaning?
Meaning input from our senses. We see, hear, touch, taste, smell the world around us. These sense perceptions provide the raw data.
And that's it. That's the foundation of everything we know.
That's the core of his empiricism, yes. Knowledge isn't innate. It's derived from sense experience. We build it up piece by piece based on what we perceive.
You know, that connects back to what you said earlier about wanting a thorough understanding. Locke's view suggests knowledge isn't just given. It's something we construct from our interactions.
Exactly. It's built brick by brick. Our potential isn't fixed at birth. It develops through our engagement with the world. It's a very grounded view, really.
And he laid all this out in a specific work.
Yes, his major work on this is an essay concerning human understanding. Hugely influential book. It really shifted the focus of philosophy towards understanding the mind itself.
And its influence lasted.
Oh, absolutely. Thinkers like Rousseau, David Hume, even Immanuel Kant, they all grappled with Locke's ideas. His work is often seen as the starting point for modern concepts of personal identity, the self, how consciousness works. Really foundational stuff for psychology, too.
Okay, fascinating. Now, shifting gears a bit. from how we know things to how we organize ourselves.
Why?
Let's talk about Locke's theory of property.
Right, another really key area.
He argued it was a natural right, didn't he? Not just something society agreed on.
He did. He believed the right to own private property was fundamental, inherent.
So how did he justify that? If things start out sort of common, how does something become yours?
The key mechanism for Locke is mixing your labor with nature.
Mixing labor. What does that mean, practically?
It means applying your effort, your work, to something found in its natural state. So imagine gathering acorns or cultivating a patch of unused land or catching fish.
Okay.
By putting your work into it, your labor, Locke argued, you remove that resource from the common state that nature provided for everyone, and you make it your own. Your effort establishes your ownership.
So you invest something of yourself, your work, and that creates the right. Interesting.
Yeah, and he saw this right to property as being right up there with the other fundamental natural rights.
Like life and liberty.
Exactly. Life, liberty, and property. Those were the core natural rights for Locke. And this idea profoundly shaped, economic thinking, political ideologies, emphasizing individual freedom and control over one's possessions. Still does, really.
Okay, so that covers property. Now let's turn to the other really big pillar of his political thought, the social contract.
Right. Just as important as his empiricism, if not more so in terms of political impact.
We hear the term social contract a lot. What was Locke's specific take on it? How did he see society and government emerging?
Well, it's really helpful here to maybe contrast him with Thomas Hobbes, another major social contract theorist.
Okay, yeah. Hobbes had a pretty bleak view of human nature, didn't he?
Very bleak. He saw life in the state of nature before government as a war of all against all, basically driven by self-interest and fear, needing a super strong sovereign, the Leviathan, to keep order.
And Locke, was he more optimistic?
He was, comparatively. He acknowledged human selfishness, sure, especially once things like money complicated matters.
Yeah.
But he also believed people had a natural capacity for reason and tolerance. They weren't inherently just brutal savages.
So his state of nature wasn't quite as chaotic as Hobbes's.
Not necessarily constant war, no. In Locke's state of nature, individuals are fundamentally equal and independent. And crucially, they possess those natural rights. We talked about life, health, liberty, possessions.
Okay, sounds all right so far.
But here's the catch. In the state of nature, everyone also has the right to defend their own rights, to punish transgressors themselves.
Ah, so everyone's their own judge, jury, and executioner, basically.
Well, pretty much. And you can see the problem there, right? Bias, passion, inconsistent enforcement, escalating conflicts. It's not a stable or just situation in the long run. The right to defend oneself isn't quite enough.
Right. Things could easily get out of hand. So the social contract is the way out of that potential instability.
Exactly. People realize the limitations and dangers of the state of nature. So they voluntarily agree, they make a contract to come together and form a civil society.
And establish a government.
Yes, they establish a government whose job it is to resolve conflicts impartially, enforce laws fairly, and protect everyone's natural rights more effectively than individuals could on their own.
And the key word there seems to be voluntarily. Consent.
Absolutely critical for Locke. The only legitimate basis for political power is the consent of the governed. The people agree to give up some of their natural freedoms, specifically the right to enforce the law themselves in exchange for the security and order provided by the government.
Which was a massive challenge to the prevailing ideas of the time, right?
Huge. It directly contradicted the idea of the divine right of kings, the notion that monarchs got their authority straight from God. Locke said, no, authority comes from the people.
And what happens if the government breaks its side of the bargain? If it starts violating those natural rights instead of protecting them?
Well, this is where Locke gets really radical for his time. He argued that if the government becomes tyrannical, if it consistently acts against the interests and rights of the people,
then
the people have not just the right, but sometimes even an obligation to resist that government, even to overthrow it. Revolution, in certain circumstances, is justified because the government has broken the social contract.
Wow. You can really see how that would resonate with, say, the American colonists later on.
Absolutely. Again, think of the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. That's pure Locke.
And the structure of government, too, like separation of powers.
Yes, while maybe not as detailed as Montesquieu later, Locke definitely advocated for separating governmental powers, legislative, executive, as a way to prevent tyranny and limit authority. The U.S. Constitution reflects that thinking, too.
It's just incredible how these philosophical arguments from, the late 17th century laid the groundwork for so much modern democratic thought and practice.
Truly profound impact.
Now, before we wrap up, it's probably important to touch on some, let's say, nuances or complexities in Locke's thought. No thinker exists in a vacuum, right?
Absolutely. It's crucial for a balanced view. For instance, Locke was a major advocate for religious tolerance.
Ah, right. His letters concerning toleration.
Exactly. He argued strongly for separating church and state. His reasoning was partly practical. You can't truly force belief with violence. It just causes social disorder. But also, philosophical human judgment is fallible, especially in matters of faith. Governments shouldn't compel religious uniformity.
Pretty forward thinking for the era.
Very much so. However,
There's always a however, isn't there?
well, it's also important, as historians point out, to acknowledge the complexities around his involvement or lack thereof concerning things like the Atlantic slave trade or child labor. He had investments, connections.
Like with the Royal Africa Company, I believe, and
Yeah.
the Fundamental Constitutions of Carolina, which had provisions about slavery.
Yes, those connections exist and are documented. It reflects the often deep contradictions within the era and even within influential thinkers. Some argue his role is sometimes overstated or point to later actions, but the involvement is part of the historical record.
So it's about seeing the whole picture. The groundbreaking ideas alongside the aspects that sit uncomfortably with modern values, or even with his own stated principles.
Exactly. Understanding historical figures means engaging with them in their context, acknowledging inconsistencies, and appreciating the legacy in a nuanced way, not just selectively.
Right. Okay, so let's try to maybe summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive on John Locke.
Where to begin? He fundamentally changed how we think about where knowledge comes from. With empiricism and that idea of the tabula rasa, the mind as a blank slate shaped by experience.
And equally important, he provided a powerful foundation for modern ideas about legitimate government.
Absolutely. Natural rights, life, liberty, property, the social contract based on the consent of the governed. The right, even the duty, to resist tyranny.
Concepts that really fueled the Enlightenment shaped liberalism as we know it.
And profoundly influenced political systems, especially as we've seen in the United States. The echoes are undeniable.
So, maybe a final thought for you listening. How might Locke's big idea, that experience is what fundamentally shapes our understanding, influence how you think about things?
Yeah, how do you approach new information knowing it's your experiences that build your knowledge? How does it affect the way you form your own views, political or otherwise?
Something to reflect on, definitely. That continuous interplay between what we encounter and how we understand the world.
A conversation Locke started that, in many ways, we're still having today.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.